Please monitor the chat during this, linking you to the 2021 ATOR and other resources relevant to the discourse of the day. Now, without further ado, it is my pleasure and honor to hand over to the chair of Plenary Session 5, which will address progress toward achieving the CAADP goals. He is Mr. Ernest Ruzidaza, Senior Agriculture Specialist at the World Bank. Mr. Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Leila. Thank you, everyone. Of course, today is the third day of our conference, our research annual conference. And we'll actually give 2 hours and 2.5 hours to discuss CAADP implementation. But before we go to the discussion, I need to request Tefera to come and brief us about what has been discussed yesterday, so that we start the third day having in mind with the flow of the discussion of yesterday. So Tefera, before we continue, I would like to give you the floor so that you brief us on day 2. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you very well. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending where you are. My name is Undernourishment Tefera. I'm Senior Associate Scientist at Academia 2063. I will very briefly share with you the day 2 recap and day 3 program. Day 2 yesterday started with a plenary session 3 on the response of African countries to COVID-19 and social protection. In this session, research findings related to social protection during COVID-19 were presented. The first presentation was on delivery of social protection programs to combat COVID-19 in Africa by Dr. Jean Ducoslav. This is followed by a presentation on assessing African economic policy against COVID-19 by Dr. Getao Tadessa. In the presentation, it was discussed how effective the different types of response programs in different African countries were based on
losing you. Connection issue apparently. Can you hear Tefera or?
It sounds like we've lost him, unfortunately.
Yeah, we lost him. Yeah.
The issue seems to be general with academia, because I see 2 academia participants here also having some connection issues. The host and the co-host.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, that's too bad.
It seems to be.
I'm back now. I'm sorry.
Welcome back, Wandwasan. We can hear you now.
All right. Sorry, there is a frequent interruption of electricity from my part, and that's causing some internet connection, even yesterday as well. I was talking about the second presentation by Dr. Getao Tadessa, and I was saying that in the presentation, it was discussed how effective different types of response programs implemented by the 7 African countries have been, and based on the results, several policy recommendations have been forwarded. The third presentation deals with rethinking the role of social protection in African food system post-COVID-19 by Dr. Benjamin Davis.
So there is still some connection issues.
Why don't we have somebody else from our side maybe fill in?
Do you have someone to make the same presentation quickly?
Sure. Let me, let me just quickly call up the agenda and I can review that. Thank you.
Okay, please.
So we had the presentations that Wandwosen was mentioning on countries' responses to COVID-19 and social protection, including after the presentation by Benjamin Davis, we had a presentation by Ebenezer Kofi on a consumer-focused food security assessment or value chain assessment framework. And following those set of presentations, we had a panel discussion with some very well-informed experts on policy responses to COVID and social protection. The second session of yesterday was on measurement issues related to assessing the impacts of COVID and also in assessing resilience, both to COVID and to future shocks. And there we had presentations from Dr. Racine Lee on using remote sensing and machine learning to assess crop production and to make predictions of crop production prior to the next harvest. We also had a presentation from Mark Constas, one of the co-editors of the ATOR, on integrating a measure of the resilience of public health systems into a resilience measurement. And he had proposed integrating this measure of health systems readiness into the metric used to assess resilience for the Malabo biennial review. Then we had a presentation from Marco Derico, and he actually used the resilience metric that was introduced by Mark Constas and used it together with the FAO RIMA framework, which assesses resilience, and applied it to several countries as an example. And then finally, we had a second presentation from Dr. Ebenezer Kofi to talk about different methods of dietary assessment and how these could be adjusted to apply to COVID-19. And after that, we had another informative panel discussion and a plenary discussion before the end of the day. So Wandwosen, are you back or are you still having some connection issues? I'll quickly review what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be focusing on CAADP implementation, and we're going to be having two presentations, the first by me on our chapter in the annual Trends and Outlook report that reviews CAADP implementation progress and also progress on the CAADP results framework indicators. And then we're going to be having a presentation from Dr. Simplice Nuala, the head of agriculture and food in the Department of Rural Economy, agriculture, and I'm sorry, I don't have the.
That's okay.
Thank you.
That's
Thank you,
okay,
Simplice. AUC Darby.
Thank you for the brief. I think,
okay.
Let me come in now.
Sounds good, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the summary was very good and links very well with the discussion of today, where we're actually going to discuss progress toward achieving CAADP goals. And we have first two presentations. The first one will come from Ms. Collins, Ms. Julie Collins. The second one, of course, will come from Dr. Nuala Simplice from African Union Commission. I think there is a purpose and why we want to discuss this actual theme, progress toward achieving CAADP goals. We know all very well that CAADP has commitments well articulated in Malabo, and continent and all stakeholders and member states have put in place, the way to track implementation of CAADP through biennial review and other exercises that are done by RISACs. So today we want really to see how the progress toward CAADP and what policies that we need to put in place to accelerate implementation. We know that we are living difficult moments. We are challenged by COVID-19 impacts, negative impacts. We are challenged by conflicts in Africa. We are challenged by climate change. But now, having that in mind, how do we make sure that we accelerate the implementation of these commitments that have been made in 2014 by heads of state? What are we learning? How can we actually, come up with innovative ways, innovative policies that help countries to achieve their commitments? Without taking long, I want to call Julie Collins, to come and actually make her presentation on how to track CAADP Malabo indicators. Thank you, Collins.
Thank you, Ernest, and greetings again to all of the participants and to the other presenters and panelists. I'm very happy to join you today and to present our ATOR chapter on tracking key CAADP indicators and implementation processes. This chapter was co-authored together with Wandwoson Tefera and Tsitsi Makombe. So as I'm sure that you know, RISACs provides data and knowledge products to inform the implementation of CAADP. And one of the key activities that RISACs does in order to do this is to track progress on the CAADP results framework 2015 to 25, and also other relevant indicators. And a lot of the indicators of the results framework are overlapping with the BR indicators, but some of them do not and are complementary. They can provide additional information to inform the progress of countries in progressing towards these agricultural development goals. The data tracked by RISACs is available on our website, www.risacs.org. And also every year in the ATOR, we report on the CAADP results framework indicators. So chapter 14 of this year's ATOR reports on 27 of the CAADP RF indicators. And these are the indicators that have available data. Efforts are underway to increase the data available, but those are still in progress. And in the presentation today, we're just going to be looking at a few of the indicators that we track in the ATOR, but we hope that you'll take a look at the chapter for more information. So first, a very quick glance at CAADP implementation progress. We look at the status of agricultural joint sector reviews, at first and second generation national agriculture investment plans, and also at participation in the biennial review processes. And you'll hear more about the third BR process in the next presentation from Dr. Simplice Nuala. So the good news is that CAADP implementation is progressing, it's continuing. We have more countries with second generation NIPES. And we also have increasing participation in the BR processes. There was already a high participation in the first BR with 47 countries reporting data, but that has increased to 51 countries in the current BR cycle. And of course, it is very important to ensure that the national agricultural investment plans that countries have developed are implemented. Also important to ensure that what countries are learning from the BR process is used to inform the development of NIPES and the implementation of NIPES. And as most of you probably know, the CAADP PP is taking place next week with the theme of implementation. So you'll have a chance there to discuss how implementation can be facilitated and accelerated. We look at just a few indicators, and the first one that we wanted to highlight for you is government agriculture expenditure share, the share of government agriculture expenditure in total government expenditure. And this is one of the original CAADP goals, to have a 10% government expenditure share. So this has not been achieved for Africa as a whole. Some individual countries have been able to meet this target over the years. And in 2020, we had 4 countries that met the target. That's Ethiopia, Malawi, Benin, and Lesotho. But for Africa as a whole, the government agriculture expenditure share was only 2.5% on average in the 2014 to 2019 period, and down to 2.1% in 2020. So this certainly could have been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. It likely was, but it was also not moving in the right direction before the pandemic. The level of government agriculture expenditure was growing in the early CAADP years. It grew steadily, but then it started to decline in the 2010s. It declined in the 2014 to 2019 period, and then further in 2020. And that's why we have this declining government agriculture expenditure share. Another key indicator that is with us from the beginning of CAADP is the growth rate of agriculture value added. And we have a 6% annual growth rate target for this indicator. So in 2020, agriculture was a relative bright spot. It was not affected as badly as overall economies and as many other economic sectors. And we actually had positive agricultural growth in Africa in 2020. There is survey data that shows that more households entered agriculture in 2020 than left. And there's suggestion that agriculture was a buffer to households who had lost income in other areas. So despite this, the agriculture growth rate did not meet the target. It was 3% for Africa as a whole in the 2014 to 2019 period, and that declined to 2.4% between 2019 and 2020. But as with government agriculture expenditure, there are some countries that have been able to achieve the target. And Kenya, Rwanda, and Tanzania did achieve the 6% growth target on average throughout the entire 2008 to 2019 period. We also looked at undernourishment. And this is an area, again, that was definitely very severely affected by COVID-19, but also had been moving in the wrong direction even before the pandemic. So if you look at the graph, we show the annual average growth rates during different periods after the launch of CAADP. And we had declines, annual average declines in undernourishment in the 2003 to 2008 period and 2008 to 2014 period, but then undernourishment actually started rising in the 2014 to 2019 period, and it grew by 1.1% annually. So that isn't only the numbers of undernourished people increasing, it's actually the rate of undernourishment that was growing in those years. So that's definitely not what we want to see in spite of the economic growth that was happening during that period. We had a prevalence of undernourishment of 19% in 2019, and it's projected to have risen to 21% in 2020. That's an FAO projection. They believe that there are 46.2 million additional undernourished people in 2020 due to COVID. And finally, we look at poverty, which also has been declining since the beginning of CAADP and declining prior to the pandemic in 2020. We had the prevalence falling slowly but steadily up until 2020. But despite the falling prevalence, the absolute numbers of poor people have been rising since the 2000s. The prevalence hasn't been falling fast enough to decrease the number of poor people. And these numbers are also expected to have increased sharply in 2020 due to the COVID pandemic. So in conclusion, we note that CAADP implementation is continuing, and despite COVID and despite all of the disruptions caused because of the pandemic, countries have continued to advance, and participation in the biennial review is increasing, which is very good news. And again, you'll hear more about that in the following presentation. But the COVID-19 pandemic has affected progress towards the CAADP and Malabo goals. In addition to what we talked about in the presentation today, it's affected economic growth, it's affected employment, household consumption, intra-African trade. There's a lot of areas where it's really retarded progress on these goals. But it's important to bear in mind that even before the pandemic, progress was slowing in a lot of areas, and also was even moving in the wrong direction in some areas. For example, the rising prevalence of undernourishment. And this really highlights the need to invest more in resilience to crises, but also in productive capacities in order to help put Africa back on a better track to achieving the CAADP and Malabo goals. And in the different presentations and panel discussions earlier in the conference, you've heard a lot of ideas about what kinds of investments and what kinds of policy focus we should have. And our panel later today will be discussing this more also. So thank you. Over to you, moderator.
Thanks very much. I think this is a very nice presentation. Thanks, Julie. I think you pointed out some really important messages, but of course the key one is that COVID actually worsened even the situation, which was not very good. We know that the two reports, the two BR reports showed that Africa was not on track to achieve Malabo, but then with COVID, the situation became even worse. So we saw how government are investing in agriculture. We saw information on undernourishment, information on poverty, and then some, recommendations, policy recommendations where we can invest to actually to bring Africa on track as far as achieving Malabo, CAADP Malabo goals is concerned. So resilience, productive capacity, and but then we'll go into details after the second presentation with the panel. Let me ask then Dr. Simplice to come and make his presentation on Malabo BR process. Dr. Simplice, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ines, moderator. I would like to share my screen with you so that, okay, let me go from, good. So good afternoon, good morning from where you are joining. And I want to quickly take you through the third biannual review process and what the next steps as per today. The first slide will look like repetitions, but we always said repetition is the mother of learning. So you will see in the next slide, the CAADP, just a reminder about the commitment, the Malabo commitment, that are both aligned to the UN SDG, to the African Union Agenda 2063, and to the UN Food Systems Summit outcomes. These 7 commitments are the following. You have the commitment on to the principle of CAADP values and the process. You have the commitment on enhancing investment in agriculture, and some of which was just presented now. You have the commitment on ending hunger on the continent by 2025. You have the 4th commitment, which is on halving poverty through agriculture by 2025. You have the commitment on boosting inter-African trade. You have the 6th commitment, which is on enhancing resilience to climate viability. And in the discussions that we are having, and in the era of the COVID pandemic, there are discussions whether these 6 commitments could be broadened to all shocks, including climate viability, rather than to focus only on climate viability. And the 7th commitment, which is on mutual accountability for actions and results, where the CAADP process falls. Now, I just want, before I start sharing with you, to just remind you of this call for action. And if you look at the second bullet, the second bullet is clear that the peer review mechanism is to encourage good performance. It's not only about measuring the progress that we are making towards the Malabo commitment, but is more importantly to encourage good performance. And this aspect of encouraging good performance have been somehow been overlooked. People have looked at the report, and then what? How are the results of the report triggering actions? So the entire third biannual review process was designed having this back in our mind, not only to have a report at the end, but more importantly, a report that can trigger action at country level. So the third biannual review report is part of this entire process that started in 2018 with the inaugural report presented to the head of state during the assembly in 2018. We have the second one to the assembly in 2020, and the third one will be presented next year, January, February. And before the report is presented to the head of state, to the assembly, it is prepared and presented to the ministers in charge of agriculture, who will meet this year in December, that is next month. And the data that is considered for this third biannual review report covers the period 2015 to 2020. Now, how do we started the process? It started somewhere in May 2020. And we started the process by a critical analysis of the first and the second BR process. And we have 3 levels of critical analysis. The first one was what I would call the pure technical critical analysis. And this was done with the BR task force. And the issues that we discussed during this critical analysis were around the data quality. If you look at the first and the second BR report, the issues of the data quality or the recommendation on strengthening data systems at country level have always come. So we needed to look at the data quality and how this can be addressed in the third BR cycle. We also look at some of the indicators that for the first 2 BR were silent or unutilized to take a decision on how do we move forward with these indicators. We have the whole issue about the new indicators. For your information, because of the momentum that the BI's process is having, especially the report, many decisions that are frameworks that have been endorsed by the EU policy organs we have been requested to report on the implementation of this decision through the BR process. And you can only do this if you critically look at the data that exists or the indicator that exists already to see whether the indicators related to these frameworks are captured. And if they are not, you start thinking of how do we get new indicators in the process. We also discussed the EBR, which is the web-based tool for data entry and management. What are the issues? It was first used for the second BR, so we have to look at the lessons. What is it that needs to be improved? How can we make it more friendly, usable, and so on and so forth? So this was the first part of the critical analysis. The second part was a critical analysis on the process, I will call it that way, but it's really here looking at the coordination. If you look at, you read the decision requests the African Union, the AUDA, NEPAD, with partners to work on the BR report. But one key important stakeholder in this are the regional economic communities, because they are central to the BR. Someone said, without the regional economic communities, you can't have the BR report. So we needed to discuss among ourselves the issues related to the roles and responsibility of each one of these three institutions, the issues related to coordination, and the overall challenges that we face during the BR process. And the last level of critical analysis was the one done with the stakeholder. And this really speaks to how the BR is used, how the stakeholder perceive the BR as a tool for planning, as a tool to improve performance. So we have this critical analysis, and this was done during the Malabo Policy Learning event, where we have about 200 participants from all the sectors, and we critically discuss the implications of the BR report, the highlights from some member states, how we can learn from each other, really discussing with them to see whether the report as it is allows them to take action, can trigger actions at country level. So based on this critical analysis, we had some key outcomes. And the first one was the revision of the BR technical guidelines, the country reporting template, and the technical notes. So these are critical and very important documents that are used for the BR cycle. So these were revised. The second one, and which was quite important, was to take a decision on the 3 silent indicators. Then we decided as a group to include 2 of these indicators in the analysis, and we remove 1. And we also decided not to have new indicators for this cycle. And the simple reason being that the analysis or the work that is to be done before a new indicator is accepted in the BR process, the work was not enough. So that the work is in progress, the work will be done, and these indicators will be presented again to the BR task force for the decision to be taken, whether we should add them in the 4th BR process. One of the decisions that we take, another decision, was the revision of the 2021 benchmark. Initially, based on our computation, the benchmark for this 3rd BR was 7.66. And because we have now included 2 new indicators, we have removed 1 silent indicator, and then we have revised the benchmark for an indicator, the ones on agricultural research, from 10 to 5 as a benchmark. This automatically led to a revision of the total benchmark from 7.66 to 7.28. So we also revised a lot of work done on the BR system, not only to reduce the data entry errors, but also to flag out some data that we could call outliers. So all this work was done, and the EBR system was revised. But more importantly, at the end of this process, we produced a short document on some common data errors and gaps that will require additional investment by the AU and the member state and the REX to build capacity. So we try to look at these data errors that comes regularly and trying to see how this could be part of a package of capacity building for the next cycle. One other thing that we did at the early stage of this BR cycle was the agreement on the theme of the report. In the past, the theme of the report was agreed at the time of writing the report. But this time around, because the third BI cycle is being conducted under two specific environment contexts. The first one, the COVID-19 context. The second one, the UN Food System Summit. We thought it would be important to discuss the theme in advance so as to allow collection of additional data if these data are not captured already in the BR. And once we agreed with the team, which is on accelerating CAADP implementation for resilience African food system, then there was a need to collect additional data. And basically this was about the policy response to COVID-19, and this was discussed yesterday, the impact of COVID-19 and the subsequent lockdown measures on the food systems, the government, private sectors, responses, and the rest. So all these additional data were compiled in the form and administered together to the member state for data collection. One other outcome, and which is also an innovation in this third BR cycle, was the inclusion of a report on previous AU decisions that are related to agricultural transformation. You are all aware that apart from the CAADP, which is the overall framework, the AU policy organs or our leaders have endorsed several frameworks, strategies that are related to agricultural transformation. Many of us will remember the 2006 Fertilizer Summit, where we have some clear decision, and then it was then a need to report on this. So we agreed that we should introduce a short report on the implementation of these decisions using the BR data, and where the data are not available in the BR, we could use other credible sources. So we agreed on the set of 8 or 9 policies frameworks on which we should report. And after this only, we develop a roadmap for the third BI cycle, working backwards, knowing when we are to submit the report to the STC, we work backwards on the roadmap with clear milestones and clear targets. The first activity that we had was the training of trainers. And because of the COVID-19 pandemic, I want to also highlight here that the third BI cycle was mostly virtual. This has its advantage that we could have a lot of interactions, a lot of consultations, we could train more people. So for the training of trainers, we train about 64 experts who were then in charge of conducting or facilitating training of national experts. And we had 3 sessions. We could easily organize 3 sessions of the training of national experts to conduct the exercise. Then after this training of experts and national experts, we revisit the allocation of member states to the regional economic communities. The African Union did recognize 8 regional economic communities, and we have been working with 7. However, the BR report, the regions in the BR report are the 5 political regions of the African Union. And the allocation of member states as per the regional economic communities and the political regions are not the same. So we needed to have this exercise and have a consensus on which member state should be under which regs. The regs here, because I've said it again, they are central to the process because they are the one mobilizing the member state, supporting the member state, validating data in the region, and submitting the data to the African Union. So once this was done, and this is just a table showing how the member states were allocated to regional economic communities. So once this was done, each regional economic community developed a regional roadmap. And once the regional roadmap was validated, the data collection started at country level. It took about 3 to 4 months for data collection. Data collected were validated by multi-stakeholders, validation workshops at country level, submitted to regs. You have another validation at regional economic communities, and the data verified by the regs are now were submitted to the African Union Commission. The BR process is a very, very inclusive and a partnership process. The African Union, that is the Commission and the Development Agency, together with the regs, cannot produce the BR alone. So we worked a lot with partners, and we have some strategic partners, the research, the policy link, Academia 2063, IFPRI, FAO, and AGRA. Those are our strategic partners. And these strategic partners are supported by individual experts or institutions from the various member states. I feel it will be important to have their list here, since the slide or the presentation will be shared with all, so that we can see those who are supporting the BR process. Now, after the data was submitted, we have a report writing exercise. And the report writing exercise start with a data cleaning and consolidation exercise. Yes, data are validated at regional level and submitted, but again, before we start writing, because we are looking to have a credible report, we need to check whether there are no mistakes or whether there are no outliers and so on in the data that we will be analyzing. And for this cycle, and again, thanks to COVID-19, everything could be done at a time virtually. We have to do 2 times the data cleaning. So we did the first data cleaning. It took us about 3 or 4 days, seated in a room. But again, we could not pick all the errors. And thanks to the expert of IFPRI and research, who could go back and read again and found some errors, we went back to the member state to correct this or to confirm the data that was submitted. So once this exercise was done, we generated the results, and we have basically 4 types of results that we generate. We have the scorecard, which shows the overall results. We have the regional profile, which shows the report in the 5 regions. We have the country profiles, and then we have the scorecards, the scores per commitment and by parameter. So based on this, we start our preparations. Now, the outlines of the report that
5 minutes ago. 5 minutes ago.
Yes, I'm just rushing. The outline of the report is here. And as you would see, we have introduced 2 new things in the report, which is the implementation of the key recommendation, the key decisions, and a chapter or a paragraph on acknowledgement to recognize the contribution of all the experts and partners to the production of the BR. The next thing during this was the communication tool. We also have a lot of consultations with regional economic communities on the CAADP communication tools. And these consultations came in as a result from a recommendation from the last STC. So we have the recommendation from the consultations, and we now have a toolkit that has been revised. Now, in terms of the next step, currently we are sharing the draft report with the regional economic communities, and we really want to enhance ownership. We want to look at the communication tool, but more importantly, we want to develop and validate a post-BR report work plan. After the report has been endorsed, what next? We want to have a clear roadmap and activities that will be conducted. So we are doing it as we speak now. The report will be presented in December to the ministers and in January to the head of state. And we do hope that by March 2022, we will start not only the implementation of the activities, but also start on time the fourth biannual review cycle. So this is the next step. These are the next steps and the process. I want to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Simplis. That was a nice presentation. I think with this presentation, we can see actually where we are coming from and what kind of effort that you've made, learning from the first BR, second BR, and now the third BR. I think it's really, the effort is tremendous. Indeed, as you said, it's not just about tracking. It's also about how actually we provide incentive for implementation. I think this is a good introduction to the second part of this discussion, where we'll have our panelists discussing actual CAADP implementation. So let me invite Dr. John Ulimwengu. Dr. John Ulimwengu will be one of the panelists. And John Ulimwengu, of course, works for IFPRI, and he's the head of research coordinator. And you know him very well. I don't want to introduce him. He has been always here to support, CAADP implementation. And on the same panel, we'll have Dr. Augustine Wambo-Yamju. And Augustine Wambo-Yamju works for AUD and EPAD. And you know him, of course, as previously as head of CAADP. And he has been very key in developing all these tools and also pushing for CAADP implementation. And we have Robert Ouma. Robert Ouma is the regional coordinator of AgriLinks. And you know Robert very well as well. He has been there for all these BR exercise, NAIP, Malabo domestication, facilitating meetings, trying to push the agenda. And now he's heading technical institutions and technical institution that is involved in actually supporting policy to push the CAADP agenda. So I would also want to call again back Dr. Simplis. I think there are some questions that he can attend to. Dr. Simplis, who is now, of course, as he has been introduced as head of agriculture and food in the Department of DREA, African Union Commission. So let me ask with Dr. John. I think, John, you are involved in many works, and now you have been involved, and now you are involved even more during this period where we're experiencing, negative impact of COVID-19. So I know research have undertaken a lot of work, to measure the impact. But from your work, I need to really I mean, you to share with the participants, you know, what are the policies that are now proposed to make sure that Africa can actually accelerate CAADP implementation, having in mind that, you know, acceleration has been slowed down by this COVID-19. But of course, as we said, Africa was not on track even before COVID-19. So there was some policies that were there, but now how do you propose, what are the policies, what are the new policies that are you proposed to actually accelerate this implementation? Over to you, Dr. Joe.
Thank you, Ernest, and thank you again for the organizers to have us here. Instead of me prescribing policies which will be ambitious, but as from experience from the work that we've been doing as part of the RESACs, what I would suggest is rather that countries learn from all the reporting cycles, and that's something that we don't see. We have now 3 reporting cycles, the BR cycles, and it doesn't look like countries are learning. And the 3 by 2025, we have only 2 left. So my suggestion will be that after the 3rd BR is released, that every single country take a time to learn from the 3 previous, the 3 cycles. First, what worked, what didn't work, that countries have now to organize those joint sector review based on the results of those BR, and then, and only then, they can revise policies, what worked, what didn't work, from each commitment. If possible, we are advising countries to go even beyond the national level, extend the learning process at local level, community, regions, provinces. That's very, very important. Basically, countries have to go back to the drawing board when they are revising the national agriculture investment plans, because I know, when the BR times comes, people are more worried about the ranking, but the ranking are just the result of the type of policies, the quality of policies, the quality of implementation that the countries are putting in place. So instead of prescribing a policy, I would rather recommend countries to take a time, use all the 3 BR reports, and of course, the MNE reporting that Julie presented through the RESACs platform, and then revise policies accordingly, because the end result depends on the quality of the policies. And the reason why this mutual accountability process was put in place was precisely for countries to learn as they progress. Unfortunately, there is very little learning going on, except a handful of countries. So that will be my prescription, instead of prescribing specific policies, which will be too ambitious, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that is wise. That's very wise. Let me go to Augustine. Of course, I also want to ask probably the similar question, but differently. Augustine, you have been, leading CAADP for years, and now we are coming with this 3rd report of the BR. So how do you see? How do we engage differently member states to actually trigger action in line with the findings of the BR? Please, your micro, please. Your micro is not on.
Yes, sorry about that, Ines. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. I'd like to thank academia for that. The question you are asking, I think, is kind of following what was addressed to John. And I will look at the question from a complementary angle to help address part of the point that John was raising. Maybe before I do that, I wanted to just highlight that today we are talking about resilience. I just wanted to, for us to recall that it was not easy to talk about it the way we're doing it today. 15 years ago, when this process started, we are able to handle this issue today because we have been able to equip ourselves with the required tools and instruments, the knowledge that is needed to speak about this with the authority that we seem to have gained. Now, John was talking about the need for countries to demonstrate that they are learning from year to year, that they are learning. I think what is missing there, in my view, is how do you apply the knowledge that you have gained, the lessons that have been learned over the years. I think countries are kind of learning. Of course, they are chasing after better ranking in the BR. But at the same time, one thing that we should look at critically and agree that maybe has not been done enough is that there is a gap between what you learn, how you apply it, and how much what intensity you put in the application of the good practice that you have learned. My take on the issue is that we have, over the years, pushed for countries to score better, to do A, B, C, D better than the previous year. But where we have been, in my view, not very articulate is on making sure that the recommendations that we make to countries from the BR are indeed adhered to by going beyond learning, but by applying. I think one way of doing it is what John was mentioning, the joint sector review. I think this is something that if we are able to push, I'm sorry, I think if we are able to push,
It's okay, you can continue. We know. It's okay.
Yes, I'm saying that if we are able to get to a point where the joint sector review process is generalized, we secure more buy-in from countries, from regional economic communities, for people to get exposed to the value that the joint sector review can bring. I think this will be a very tremendous progress going forward. So in the aftermath of COVID, the way I see it, we should sit and dedicate more time on the actions that are required to help countries address the issues that the BR has been able to bring to the fore. It may not be enough for us to make the recommendations and move away and expect that the countries would do what they have not done for the past 15 years. In my view, if we want to see more results on the ground as a consequence of the recommendations that we'll be making through the BR, let's embrace some more hand-holding and see how far that goes. When I say we, I'm talking principally about the AU institutions, but also about all the key players that are gathered here. They can play an important role in this. Thank you.
Thanks, Augustine. I think there are some good comments that are coming also in the chat. I see a comment from Martin Fowler and a comment from Mbai. Very good comments. The comment from Martin, of course, is saying that the report is just buried after, after its launching. So, but this brings me to the question I want to ask to Robert. Robert Ouma, please, we've been talking about learning, how countries are learning, we're talking about, knowledge sharing, and the power of this report. So for institutions like yours, you are supporting policy, you're also supporting learning, of course. So how do you see yourself positioning and trying to support countries to actually use differently this report and generate action? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ernest. And just to restate, my name is Robert Ouma, and I am part of Policy Link, which is a Feed the Future, USAID Feed the Future activity. And it's correct what you said earlier on, that I have been involved in these processes for a while, working alongside the two gentlemen that have just spoken, as well as Dr. Simplice. So we've been in the trenches together, and your question is an important one that we've been grappling with for a while. How exactly do we calibrate our support? What can we do to make sure that the data we are collecting is making a difference? So I'll split my answer into two parts. The first is just some comments on how. And I'm not speaking specifically with regard to my institution, but in general, technical institutions, implementing partners who provide support. It's important to think about how you do it just as much as what you do, because sometimes how you do it may have an important influence on whether you're successful in providing support. And there are a few points I'd like to mention. One is, it's important for those of us who are not public sector individuals. We are technical partners. We are sometimes supported by development partners to realize that our place is a little different. So it's important to be neutral in the issues. Some neutrality is important. A second thing that I would like to mention is that it's important to be nimble, flexible, nimble, and provide support in a way that aligns with the priorities and interests of the partners we are supporting. In this case, I'm talking about countries, regional economic communities, and the African Union at the continental level as well. So that's important. I have seen, and I will not provide examples, but I've seen institutions that are partnering to support, for example, the BR process, forget themselves and begin to appear to lead. The decisions have to be made by the people that they're supporting in the countries, and even at subnational level. So this is really important. And another general point is that there has to be very clear communication, and we have to be very, very honest with each other about what we are able to do and what we are not able to do. So that's the how. I mean, we could go on and on about just how support can be provided, and we have learned a lot over the years. But the question that you posed to me, Ernest, is what can we do, for instance, when the third biennial review report is released, and we expect that report to start to trigger our governments at the national level, as well as regional economic communities and even AU, to begin to take steps to change their policies to align with what the report is saying, or in fact, make new investments. And I think that partners such as Policy Link have been available to help facilitate, and the word facilitation is key here, to provide support to facilitate dialogue and engagement where people can talk and reflect on those results. And many times the dialogue needs to be multidimensional. It also needs to be both vertical, meaning dialogue across, for example, sectors. People forget that dialogue itself is a skill set. You need technical support to facilitate dialogue. And I've been doing a lot of facilitation, so I've realized that sometimes the difference between whether a meeting or a process is successful is the quality of facilitation. So one of the things we can do is help to provide and bring this technical facilitation to support dialogue processes, which then help people to both understand the report and see what needs to be done. Another thing is coordination. And again, coordination has different dimensions. I mentioned the vertical element of dialogue and coordination, but there's also horizontal among like line ministries, vertical between the national government and sub-national units. In many African countries, we forget, at least in CAADP sometimes, that it's just not the national government. There are federal governments, but there are also regional, and in a country like Kenya, we have county governments and so on, which in their own right make decisions, investment and policy decisions. That's a missing part that we have to address. But there is diagonal, which means those partners that are not part of the government. These have to be brought into the conversation through coordination and dialogue. And these are like non-state actors, for instance, who play a big role in implementation. I haven't seen the power of NGOs, civil society groups, farmer organizations, private sector associations, and so on, that do a lot of things that need to understand this report. So we could play a role in helping bring technical support to do those things, to plan for those things, and the tools and capabilities to do them, and the communication around that. But all of this, and this is my last point, because I do agree with Simplice that there has to be a plan, an intentional plan around it. I think the difference between, for example, what we might do going forward and what we have done in the past in terms of the post-BR report process is that the intentionality of making a plan where you are saying we shall do the following things once the heads of state and government approve of this report, and then we follow through with those things. That intentionality seems to be there right now, and I think that will make a very big difference. Thank you very much, Ernest.
Thank you, Robert. I think the points are very. You talked to the point, but you're mentioning a key element, and I want to go beyond actually the plan that you are mentioning, because that one for me is just what we call in French feuille de route, a roadmap. So there is a plan actually for implementing Malabo. We always talked about national agriculture investment plans. We are talking about tracking, but tracking is an element in the process. Okay, so now I want to go back to Augustine now about now these NAIPs. So because we are discussing how to achieve progress toward achieving CAADP goals, and the question is, how do we actually inform NAIPs from the findings of different BRs recommendations that are coming? How do we? It goes back probably to the dialogue, but it's important again to bring back the NAIPs at the central of implementation. How do we make sure that countries have quality NAIPs that actually participatory, formulated and implemented, attracting private sector, where around which we can actually build, this dialogue we are talking about, around which we build this, this learning we are talking about. So how do we go back to? I'm saying go back because I think there was a momentum at a certain point. We can say we can accuse COVID, but there is somehow I will say it as it is, a lost momentum as far as NAIP formulation is concerned. I might be wrong, but I want Augustine to come in. But then another element. From the evaluation that you conducted in 2013, there was a central element to say we can't achieve agriculture growth only with the ministries of agriculture. Okay, how do we make sure that these NAIPs that are formulated actually are well coordinated with all stakeholders who are involved in implementation? Augustine, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ernest, for those two questions. Maybe first thing, I would like to say that in any case, there is no way we can look at all these things in a static manner. We have to put everything dynamic. That's one. That means what we were trying to achieve 15 years ago has not really changed, but the way we're trying to get there is where we have made a lot of progress. We have improved because of the knowledge that we have accumulated and so on and so forth. I personally believe that the conversation that we're having today on the food systems is, when it comes to CAADP, is not really new because we are still talking about the same issues. The momentum, of course, has been generated around the Food System Summit and has helped us to elevate the CAADP Malabo issues into the global agenda. We are very thankful for that. I'm very grateful. The question you're asking about achieving all these goals, not relying only on agriculture, is very central. That's why in the Malabo Declaration, the issue of multi-sectoral coordination and contribution was very key, and that was very important, meaning that it goes beyond the mission of agriculture to take us where we have to get. That appreciation is well taken, but how do we do it is where I believe the link has been missing. Action has been missing. Probably we have seen a lot over the past, 18 months or so of the pandemic. If we have learned something, we have learned that we have to bring to the table more than one single line ministry, as we call it at times in countries, to achieve all these ambitious goals that we have set for ourselves. Meaning we have to make sure that we really walk the talk when we talk about the multi-sectoral arrangement to get to the result that we are aiming at. Now, going back to the night, yes, of course, before the pandemic struck, the momentum had already slowed down, as you indicated, because I believe several reasons could explain that. There were issues related to resources, both financial and human, within the African Union institutions that were pushing, that were facilitating the process on the ground. I think with what we've seen, it's important that we all work towards considering some of the resource allocation to ensure that this support can continue. One thing for sure, we all appreciate that we cannot compromise on the quality of the night. This is an area where I don't believe we would even entertain lowering the quality. We have to make sure that the knives are of very good quality. The guidelines are there. We know exactly what a Malabo compliant knife looks like, what it takes to get there. Let's work a little bit harder to get countries to equip themselves with a knife that is of the quality that is required for them to be in a position to expect to achieve those results. So it has to be evidence-based, it has to be, the formulation and also the implementation. The emerging issues that we have now witnessed have to be properly integrated with the expertise that is required. That will require some resources, but that will also require from the part of the country for them to be more committed to appreciate the gaps that they have been sitting with, and also to do what it takes to fill those gaps. And my understanding is that the biennial review exercise has helped and is still helping countries to appreciate that they can do more. As I was saying, once that is understood, one step forward is to make sure that that doing more is happening. This is where probably we need to invest more time, more resources. We need to apply the knowledge, not just to learn about the good practices. We need to apply those good practices into making sure that knives are of good quality. So two things. Advocacy, in my understanding, we cannot drop the ball at this point. The COVID is demonstrating that we even have more reasons to advocate. Countries cannot take chances with what is, in my understanding, their best bet, which is agriculture. Because if you go across the continent, virtually all the countries will tell you how important agriculture is. With the COVID, this has even magnified the importance of agriculture for those who were trying to hide from the reality. The second, we need to have a better allocation of limited resources that we have. So we are optimizing under very serious constraints. The COVID has also helped us to appreciate that countries have to fully embrace that conversation. And if we are able to support with the knowledge that we now are in a position to share, and for countries to apply those knowledge, those good practices, and take actions, I think we would be in a better position to continue having better formulated knives and better implemented knives that are informed by what is coming from the ground, thanks to the BR and all the processes that are in place to help report back data. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Augustine. I think the points are very correct, 100%. You mentioned, this UN food system, and I want to come to John. I know you have been involved in this process, because the process did not end just with the summit. I think it generated good momentum at country level. And the question is, how do we take advantage of this global initiative to actually, domesticate it into our continental processes, being NAIPS and BR. So John, I know you have done some work on this, and I just want you to share your insights on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ernest. Maybe let me quickly share my screen here to give you a sense of what. So we with the UN food system, there was two sides. One, Africa should embrace this new way of thinking, framework. On the other side, some of us were like, Africa has already something going on around CAADP and Malabo commitment. So, Africa can take advantage of it, but it doesn't mean to reshuffle everything that is going on. So what we did was to bring, again, knowledge to the table, just to see where Africa stands with respect to the food system track chain, action tracks, and the whole framework around food system. So what we did, we did a mapping of the BR framework, BR database, with respect to the food system. Here we are using action tracks. They now, apparently they are now 4, but then there were 5 of them. So on the left, the mapping of BR indicators, how many of them are within each of the action track. On the right is the progress when the African countries, how many countries have achieved. We use the same benchmarks as the BR, and it's quite interesting to see that the 10 out of 55, 15 out of 55, 0 out of 55. So the progress mirrors what we know already when we are tracking the BR. So the lesson here is that indeed the BR, the whole CAADP reporting tools, mutual accountability, have enough to report on food system, although there is room for improvement. And another thing that we try quickly to look into is that If countries achieve, assume that African countries start working toward the UN Food System Action Tracks, how that will help them achieve the overall transformation. So we a very simple correlation. It seems like there is a positive correlation between achieving here track number 1 and the Africa Agricultural Transformation score, the overall BR score. So indeed, by engaging into those UN food system track, there is a route toward transformation as included in the CAADP, the BR process. So this one is on the action track number 2, action track number 3, action track number 4. So the message really is that there are common ground between what already exists in Africa in terms of reporting, in terms of policies, because the good thing with CAADP and Malabo is that it's not only on the reporting, it is connected to policies. It's also connected to mutual accountability. So we have in Africa a more robust system that many other regions can learn from. However, I didn't show it here. We noticed that within the food system, there are some missing components. Like when you look at the whole BR database, we don't have indicators reporting on processing, for example. And that's, for me, is a big hole that we need to fill, because I mean, we cannot talk about transformation without processing. And the whole BR Malabo commitment is about transformation. So we can learn from the food system approach and all that it brings, but it has to be in a way that it adds value to what is already going on around CAADP and the Malabo commitment. Thank you.
Yes, thanks very much, John, Dr. John. I think this is very important. My last question before I go to the participant goes to Robert. I mean, all the discussion we had, of course, we'll bring the element of capacity, institutional capacity building. I mean, I know you are also involved in that, capacity building for public, for non-state actors. How do you see actually, this element taken into consideration to help us accelerate this agenda? Robert, please.
I hope you can still hear me, Ernest and colleagues.
Please.
All right, thank you. Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm glad that you asked it, because over the years, if you review the CAADP process, and Augustine will tell you this, there have been many attempts to see how to organize and deliver capacity support for the implementation of CAADP, if you're thinking about policy development and implementation. So this is something that is still a challenge and needs to be addressed. But in terms of what the areas of capacity or the capacity gap, the different areas that we need to look at if we are to support countries with their policy development and implementation, the framework that I like to look at has 6 elements, and those are the ones that I would like to share with everybody real quick. Is for you to say, you have a wholesome policy system and it's working, you need to have a strong capacity around what the overall guiding policy framework looks like. Yeah, how strong it is. This is kind of like the set of the legal processes, the way you do things. And is it just something that lasts, 5 years of a government, or has the country figured out how to develop a long-term framework that guides its policy development? So that's important. I can go into some details about what I mean by that, but having that's a capacity area that's important. 2 is this whole question of, does the country have the capacity to not only develop policy, but coordinate it? Things like determining what the right policy agenda is, having a process and dedicated resources, the coordination mechanisms, technical capacity, and including actually political will. So that's the number 2 element that I think if we need to support countries, we need to make sure that that's in place. They have those capabilities. The 3rd one, for me, this is the most important. I know people have different ways of thinking about these elements, but just the whole idea of inclusivity and stakeholder engagement. Is there the willingness, the capacity, the ability, the resources to be inclusive in the process of developing and implementing policy, especially for marginalized groups? In other words, is everybody able to be at the table? Is information available for everyone that needs it? And at different levels? What's the depth of participation? People like us who are facilitators, we know you can be in a room, but you're not actually participating. So we have to look at the depth and the impact of that participation. So that's a capacity area that I think many countries grapple with. The 4th is the whole idea of evidence. And this is relevant particularly for research colleagues who are, I know, grappling with these questions on an ongoing basis. How do you infuse your policy process with evidence? Sometimes we say evidence-informed policy making. It seems simple to say that, but it actually needs a capacity for people to know what is evidence, how does it get into the policy process at different levels, how do you consider it, is it timely, etc., etc. Is it accessible, is it credible, is it trustworthy? So the quality, the ability to generate and use quality evidence. Yeah, so that's my 4th. 5th is implementation. This is common, I mean, in many countries, including my own country, where I come from, where we can have very good policies. We even print them on glossy paper, and then we put them on a shelf, they gather dust, because they are not accompanied by...
Which country is that?
I am from Kenya, Ernest. But don't get me into trouble here. This applies to many other countries as well. But since I'm from Kenya, I can mention that sometimes we do have this problem. We have really good policies. They have been developed, we have brought all the experts, and then we don't really implement them well. But we talk about them. If somebody asks, do you have this policy? And we'll go and dust it from the shelf. Oh, we developed this. So our capacity to implement must be built. Yeah, the implementation plans must accompany the policy development process, and the capacity to implement must be considered. And resources must be put, and the implementation has to be transparent. There are many, many points under this. I want to touch the last area of capacity that I think is important. This is also close to our hearts: mutual accountability. Do we have the ability to be mutually accountable to each other, so that if in a policy process we said we are going to do this, this organization will do that, we come back and we say, okay, did you do it? JSR is one of those platforms we've been talking about. And if you didn't do it, why? And can you be accountable? Are we asking ourselves these questions in the way we should ask? Sometimes I think not. I see that we ignore, we forget. We have a tendency, particularly in African countries, to move on to the next shiny thing real quick and forget that we had promised to do something previously. So building that capacity, Ernest and colleagues, is really important to have the regular platforms for mutual accountability, whether it's government, non-state actors, private sector. Everybody must say if they did what they planned and promised. If they didn't, then they need to explain, or there should be at least some form of consequence. So those areas are the areas that I would identify as key areas. And actually, this is part of what the framework that we sometimes refer to as the institutional architecture for policy development. It's captured these 6 elements that if taken together, would give you a high quality policy environment. Thanks.
Thanks, Robert. Thank you very much. Now, I'm going to go back to the participants. Actually, they spend too much time listening to you. I'm sure they have comments and questions. So the floor is to the participants. If there is a question, please raise your hand. I see Michael Bitik. Please, Michael.
No, nothing.
Nothing, but I see your hand is, I see your hand here. Okay, fine. Who else? Okay, does it mean that it was very clear? All right. Okay. So let me go to Dr. Simplis now. Dr. Simplis, you've listened to the discussants, our panelists, what they have been able to do to bring to the table. As African Union, the question is, how do we bring all this and actually put to the countries in a way that countries can actually use, all these lessons, which frameworks, are we strengthening REX? Are we going to, I know the frameworks are all there, but how do we make sure that actually the recommendation from this meeting, because we have this meeting annually, and it makes very strong recommendations. I've been participating in research meetings and they make strong recommendations. How do we, from research, from CAADP, from other, frameworks where we discuss, how do we make sure that actually things are translated into implementable, actionable recommendations at country level? Dr. Simplis.
Thank you very much, Ernest. Maybe I will start from where Augustine stops. It's all about getting all these recommendations or processes into the country process. And unless you have all these recommendations translated into the NAIPs, there is little you can do. Now, we have been having discussions, and we hope we will get to a final conclusion on how we do this. And we have been having discussion on how can we best support countries to get all these processes, all these recommendations into their NAIP. The first thing is that we should not be naive. There are many processes that arrive at country level. And countries will not have 2 or more agricultural investment plans. They will have only 1. And it is important that as African Union institutions, that is the Commission, OUDA, NEPAD, and the REX, we understand that we need to bring to the countries all in one. Now, building on the momentum, and a lot of things have been said on this, building on the momentum created on the one hand by the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact, created by the UN Food Systems Summit. We are thinking on how do we use this momentum to advance the implementation of the CAADP Malabo. And one of the things, and this is what will come into the work plans, you were talking of a roadmap, but we are really looking at the work plan where we want to have concrete actions, not a roadmap, but concrete actions. We are thinking of packaging the Malabo commitment together with the recommendations of the BR, the first, the second, and the third BR report, the outcomes of the UN Food System Summit, and other recommendations to approach the countries and engage the countries in mainstreaming or in discussing what does it mean for the agricultural investment plan. The first thing that we have done so far with the colleagues from the AODA and EPAD is to have the status of the NAIP on the continent. Because this action would not be a global action, it should be a targeted action. Countries are at different stages of the NAIP, and depending on the stages at which the countries are, that will dictate the entry point. If we are lucky to get in the country where they are at the phase of the reformulation of their National Agricultural Investment Plan, that is an entry point to reformulate a NAIP that is Malabo compliant, but taking also into consideration the outcomes of the UN Food System Summit, the recommendation of the CAADP, BR, and the rest. So we really want from next year to be more proactive, because yes, the process has been delayed because we wanted a demand-led process, which is good because when it is a demand-led, you are confident that it is a need from the country. But what we have noted is that some countries do not even know that this demand exists. So we want to be proactive and have a clear work plan with the RECs, with partners, on how individually we approach countries and engage countries around all these Malabo commitment, the BR recommendation, and all other recommendations, so as to have what Augustin has called a very good and credible NAIP. And unless we have that, we cannot expect the member state to implement the recommendations. In some countries, you may not need a NAIP a new NAIP because they have their NAIP, but you can work with the country to have an addendum to the NAIP that is existing already. And this is something that we have to do in a more deliberate manner. This is from our side.
Thanks very much.
The other thing is that we really want to call on partners to support this effort. Domestication of the CAADP Malabo into the National Agricultural Investment Plan, it is not an African Union initiative. Because when partners view it as an African Union initiative or activity, they don't provide the necessary support. We really call for partners to understand that we can not transform agriculture on the continent if we don't align to the CAADP Malabo. And the UN food system have shown the same. Everything that is in the UN system summit outcome is already in the Malabo. We have some few things that are not there. And the common position of the continent to the UN food system was the CAADP. And for your information, in terms of tracking the progress of the UN food system, we make it clear that we will use the BR to that effect. So we will not, as a continent, we are really calling for partners not to have another system to track the progress, because the BR is there. There are some indicators that are missing, and these indicators, working together with partners of research, we are trying to identify some of these indicators, and John has made allusion to those, to include them, so that we have one process, which is the CAADP BR process to monitor, and the NAIP that are Malabo compliant, taking into consideration all the other recommendations that exist. So this is a call to partners. We are looking, because this will need resources, not only financial resources, and Augustin has alluded to that. We need human resources for this. apart from the financial resources. So this is again a call to our technical partners on how we broaden the base of expertise at regional level or at national level to be able to support the countries in this endeavor. So this is the way we look at it from the African Union. And we do hope that we are 5 years to Malabo, the Malabo target. We hope the actions that we have to take now, we should take those actions in order to meet the target in 2025.
Thank you very much. I think the call is very clear, and making that call during this research conference, it's also important, because of course research is there to support as technical support for to push the implementation of CAADP on policy side, and I think we can come back to that during the closing session. Augustine, any final words before we go to the closing session?
Thank you very much, Ernest. I'm very encouraged with how the conversation is running. From what both Robert and Simplice have just said, I think I feel very reassured that the understanding of where we need to go is very clear. One thing that probably I missed in my earlier intervention, even though you had alluded to the question, was I didn't say anything about the exercise that was done back in 2013. That was a very thorough analysis of the first 10 years experience of CAADP. Actually, the findings of that exercise that took, 2 years to complete, informed the Malabo declaration that we today are using. When we started, there wasn't any clear baseline, but from that time going forward, we were able to work on some very solid baseline that we have been using. And I think one important at this juncture, one thing that we should be doing, we are a few years away from the end of the Malabo cycle. It would be important for us to have some forward looking. I think time is probably coming for us to begin to anticipate on that and look at what has worked, what has not worked, what do we drop, what do we take to scale, how do we take that to scale, how much resources will be required for us to reach the quantum of impact that is needed on the ground for the whole transformation of the food systems to take shape in a sustainable manner. I think this is a few reflections. These are the few reflections I wanted to make. Over to you, Ernest. I don't know if I will still have an opportunity.
Thank you very much. I think with these two submissions, one from Simplice and another one from Augustine, I want to close this session on CAADP implementation, progress towards CAADP implementation. I think it was very rich. It was forward-looking, and I think the lessons from this session can also be packaged, also to be shared with CAADP stakeholders going forward to actually catalyze implementation that we want to see. Now we're requested to have a small break. I want to give back the mic to Leila to actually lead us on the following step. Leila, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Eric Rosindaza, Senior Agricultural Specialist at the World Bank and Chair of Plenary Session 5, which tackled the progress towards achieving the CAADP goals. So I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is that We've had 3 days of thought-provoking and groundbreaking discussions around building resilient African food systems after COVID-19. And this plenary sessions have provided a mine full of information and data and resources that we can use to support all these member states in achieving these goals. The bad news is that we have now come to the end of the 2021 VSACS annual conference. We are sad to be ending it so soon, but we are excited at what we have accomplished in these 3 days. And we are now moving on to the closing part of this ceremony. It is my pleasure and honor to now invite for a concluding statement, Dr. Simplice Nwada, who is the Head of Agriculture and Food, Department of Rural Economy and Agriculture at the African Union Commission. Dr. Nwada, the floor is yours again.
Thank you very much, Director of Ceremony. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it gives me a real pleasure and honor to provide some closing remarks at the end of the 2021 Research Annual Conference on the theme Building Resilient African Food System after the COVID-19. Participants may recall that last year, following the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, the African Union and partners organized several high-level ministerial meetings to identify short-term, medium-term actions to be taken to reduce the effects of the pandemic and the related restrictions on African food systems. One of these meetings was a joint meeting of ministers in charge of agriculture, trade and finance. And they requested the African Union to conduct an assessment on the impact of COVID-19 on Africa food system. I am now happy after the 2 days of discussions or 3 days of discussions that you have been able to find solutions on the challenges that we have in assessing, measuring the impact of COVID-19 on agricultural systems, but not only on COVID-19, but other related shocks. I'm happy and confident because now this report can be done and submitted to our ministers. As the third CAADP biannual review report is being also finalized for submission to the AU policy organ, we cannot be prudent enough to say that the performance of AU member states in these cycles have been negatively impacted by COVID-19. However, it is still difficult to quantify this impact so that a fair report can be produced. We are also happy that with the outcome of our discussion over the last 3 days, the fourth CAADP biannual review cycle will be able to take into consideration the real impact of COVID-19 on the performance of AU member states towards achieving the Malabo commitment. As I mentioned in my earlier presentation, we are considering discussing or submitting to our leaders to broaden the scope of the commitment 6 on strengthening resilience to climate variability to include resilience to other complex shocks. We are confident that our submission can be supported now with the outcome of the discussions that we have had over the last 3 days. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, as we close the 2021 conference, I would like to make a call to all of us that we should move the talk. And for this to happen, research should be strengthened to fully play its role as a knowledge broker and policy support to CAADP implementation. I know the African Union can continue to count on the research management, the academia 2062 management, and the expert as it has been the case over the last years. We therefore call to other partners to increase and sustain their support to research. You agree with me that the slowdown in the domestication of Malabo commitment into the National Agricultural Investment Plan is to a large extent attributed to the limited resources to provide this support. Let me finally take this opportunity once again to thank the management of Academia 2063 for the partnership and support to the African Union. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nwala, for those powerful closing remarks, very strong commitments and recognition for the work and role of Research and Academia 2063. And now we'll have some final remarks from Academia 2063's Executive Chairperson, Dr. Usman Badian. Dr. Badian?
Thank you, Lai, Dr. Butaki. It's a pleasure to speak to the audience again. And thank you to the African Union Commission, Commissioner Ambassador Joseph Asako, and Dr. Simplis Nwala, representing her here in the Commission. Thank you for her presence, for the partnership and the support. I'd also like to again say thank you to USAID's Maura Barry, who joined us here in the opening session, and to others who joined the high-level panel, like Dr. Maximo Tararo from FAO and Dr. Ismahan Al-Wafi from the FAO as well, Chief Scientist, and everybody else who's been around here. I've seen a lot of friends, old colleagues who joined us. So thank you to all of you for coming here. As you know, the RESEX conference is the time when we all come together to look back, to take stock, but also look forward and dig deep in specific thematic areas that are of strategic importance to the African agenda. So this year was no exception. After a terrible and difficult 12 to 18 months under COVID, we decided to look at what it means to us, not just as COVID, but as an example of things to come. More complex crises, maybe spanning the entire globe, and disrupting livelihoods, economic system, and so on and so forth. So learning from that, understanding how it impacts us, and how we deal with that is quite important. And the report, Africa, the annual trend and outlook report that's been presented here, and please do circulate it widely and use it as you can in your deliberations. We're happy to work with you on any event that you would like to have around it. So it looked at the ramifications of the crisis, the responses that countries and the global community have put forward, where we have been effective and successful, what worked and what did not work, from aspects around markets, to trade, to social protection, to vulnerability, to nutrition, even to the efforts to better track and measure things as they go on the ground. I think this is extremely important for us to digest this and use this to inform how we will deal with future crises when they come, not just how we build better right now and emerge from that, but also how we can be better prepared for future crises. The ATOR and the conference will also the opportunity to look at how far have we come on the African agenda itself, the Malabo agenda and the CAADP agenda. We have made progress in the past, but we're losing steam right now. It's been, I think, clear over the last couple of years that the progress has slowed. Yes, you cannot be at high speed all the time, but we have lost so much ground in the 70s and the 80s. We are right now growing, even before this recent slowdown. We're growing at a pace that would not allow us to catch up with the lost ground of during the 70s and 80s until another 25 years to come. So if we slow down again, we will continue for another generation or two without being where we would have been if we had continued our growth strategy of the 60s. For me, that's a very important yardstick. Unless we exceed the trajectory, we are still in the losing ground, despite all the progress we've made. So how we come back and make sure that we advance on this agenda, not just rebuilding better after COVID, but ensuring that we can accelerate the progress of the last 20 years and sustain it far longer so we can catch up and erase the losses of the 70s and the 80s. So that is a challenge to all of us. We heard Dr. Nwala, we heard the discussion in the RAS roundtable, and thank you for doing that for us, Ernest, and all who participated in that roundtable, that in the presentation in this morning, that there is a lot that needs to be done. I would call on to our leaders at the African Union to re-engage not just the global community, but also the African community, the African governments, the member states, to take stock and look at what's been happening, that these trends of slowing down progress is not something that is acceptable, and it is not something that has to be. We have the means, we have the resources, and we should have the will to turn things around. I remember before we ushered into this last 2 decades of growth, a very heated debate that happened at a major event in Scandinavia. And I was having a discussion with a person whose name I wouldn't like to mention. I was just happy I was ignorant enough to not know how big that person was. And we were arguing about where Africa needed to be. That was in '94. And we had a huge conference organized in Africa, and had all the experts from all over the continent. And then we were saying that Africa needed to grow at 4.5% a year in order to make progress against the Millennium Development Goals. That was the issue then. And that global figure stood up and said, forget about it. Africa could not grow by more than 2.5%. And yet what that report said was that if African countries were serious and paid attention and made the efforts, they could grow at 4.5%. That's now behind us. We've done better than that. And I think the moment has come again for us to call on the African and say, you can. It was NEPAD, it was the commitment of the African Union, it was the can-do attitude of the leadership of Thabo Mbeki, Obasanjo, Abdoulaye Wade, and Bouteflika, and others that moved the continent and get people to understand that we can do better. And I think maybe we're at that stage again for the African Union to push this. Who are going to be the champion this time around? So who are going to be the countries and the leaders to pull us and to accelerate the pace? That's going to be extremely important. We know the ATOR has shown us, the annual trend outlook report has shown us what we can do. The report of last year that looked at the policy changes, the institutional reforms, the investment that have been made to facilitate the growth we have over the last 2 decades is another complement. And I would encourage all of you to go back to the RESAC's website or the Academia 2060 website and look at the data from last year. They looked at public policies and how they made the growth of the last 2 decades possible. So I think we have some ground to build on in terms of what we need to do. Now we look forward to the leadership of the African Union and the mobilization of African centers of expertise in partnership with the global community of science to move the agenda again and accelerate and sustain the progress of the last 20 years. And that takes me, ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues, to the post-summit agenda. The discussion in just a completed roundtable. The slides from John and the BR report will show that there is an opportunity here for African countries to redouble efforts, to recommit and to take stock of where they are, where they're coming short. But there's also an opportunity for the global community to engage with Africa, to build on the efforts in Africa, to support the efforts of African countries. As Dr. Nwala said, not distract us with parallel or outside of parallel efforts and parallel agendas that are outside of what we're trying to do. So we would like to have a strong alignment with the African agenda. We would like to have complementarity in what we do, and that is possible. We have seen from what just John presented, if you do well on the Malabo agenda, you'll do well on the Food Systems Summit agenda as well. So therefore, the entry point of the global community is, how am I going to work with African countries and private sector and farmers organizations to do even better what they've been doing right over the last 20 years, to scale up and to speed up progress coming forward. And I hope this is going to be the way it's going to go. I salute and appreciate the leadership of the African Union and the African position paper. And I hope as we go into the post-summit agenda, we will be proactive, welcoming engagement by the global community, helping guide and support them in the way they'll be working with us. So I'll stop here and again, thank everybody and give you, God willing, not the date, but at least invite you to the next conference next year on a topic that is going to be equally important and exciting, dealing with agro-industrialization, the processing sector, and how we can push forward the transformation of African value chain. John just talked about how the processing is completely missing from the BR. It is just not missing from the BR, it is missing from public policy. How can we understand its contribution, its central role, and what do we need to do to move forward the processing sector and agro-industry, the agro-food industries? We have been complaining for years, wanted to add value, we wanted to create value. This is the opportunity to do it, and that's going to be the topic of next year's annual Trends in Outlook report and the topic of the annual conference. So thank you again to everybody who's been here, and thank you to the editors, to the contributors and the authors of the editor, to John, to Mark, and to Elian, and all the guys that have put together here. It was an amazing team. The presentation was really excellent. Thank you to our own team here, from Lai and her team, Julie, and those who work to make sure that we can get the editor and get it in good shape. Those who are on the website, I really loved it, of the RESX conference. Those who are facilitating this on social media, the press releases, press conference, everything that you guys have been doing has really been superb. Thank you very much, and thank you to everybody who's joined us here today. God bless. Thank you, Lai, back to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Usman Badian, for that resounding closing statement. Well, you heard him. Stay tuned for 2022 RESACs. And while we have your attention, please join us next week on November 23rd for the 9th edition of the Malabo Montpellier Forum. Check the chat box for the link to register to attend that conference. So there you have it. We have come to the end of this 3-day virtual event. Please stay tuned for our highlights on social media and through the newsletter. We are going to be sharing a lot of material after the event. The post-summit agenda is upon us right now. I'm going to like to ask you to do two things. Number one, kindly turn on your video. We have 67 participants on this call. Please turn on your video so that we can capture more images of the participants. And number two, kindly go down to the chat and write 3 words which describe this conference. I give you 3 words so that you have a word for each day. 3 words that describe 2021 RESEX. So I see a great stuff, crème de la crème, from Dr. Greenwald Machaya. I have, it was great, from Dr. Racine Lee, Rich Action Agenda from Julie Collins. It was excellent, insightful, and policy relevant. For me, it was rich, insightful, and amazing. Thank you all. All the ATOR resources are provided via links in the chat box. Please visit the RESEX conference website, academia2063.org as well, to get all the information you need. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week at the Malabo Montpellier Forum and next year at the 2022 RESEX Annual Conference. My name is Lai Butake, Director of Communication at Academia 2063, and it's been an absolute pleasure. Ciao.